Hello and shalom. I'm very happy to have you all here for another session of Yoga Readers. And today we are rereading and revisiting and questioning Yoga, A Gem for Women by Geeta Iyengar. And as a preparation for this session, we read Unit 1. So the book has many, many chapters to it. And Unit 1 had several parts. It was the foreword, also by B.K.S. Iyengar and by Geeta Iyengar herself. And then we had a few chapters, the first steps in yoga, four paths to liberation, and the paths of yoga, the part discussing sadhana. And because of time limitations, we won't be able to read the whole thing again together. But I did select a few paragraphs for us to reread. And then we can discuss together. That is why we met here on Zoom. And the reason these sessions are recorded and then published on YouTube is in order to make them available for everyone who cannot join us to the live sessions, because this is the global community and we have different times. And it's very hard to find one time that is suitable for all, but we still want the discussion to be available for all. I'll mention that if you say anything in this session that you do not want to be included in the recording that is posted on YouTube, please let me know and I'll edit out that part. Also, our discussion won't be published. It's only the reading, the joint reading together, the questions that we'll have before our discussions that will be in breakout rooms, and then we'll have our conclusion. So before we dive into what we'll do today, I'll say a few words about Yoga Readers. For those of you joining us for the first time today, Yoga Readers is a global community now of over 1,000 people from around the world that are interested in reading about yoga and not only practicing it. And we see this as a way of getting more in tune to the roots of yoga, getting a sense of a more authentic teaching, and of course, respecting the tradition of yoga. So not inventing new stuff, but exploring ourselves through the practice based on whatever we can explore through reading and reconnecting to that tradition. Rita Keller, in her talk in a special session with yoga readers, she said something amazing. She said, a good book is better than a bad teacher. And that is still echoing in me. So how much can we learn from a book? And I don't think it's a replacement for a teacher, of course. I'm a teacher myself and I have a teacher as well. But reading Geeta Iyengar is a way to reconnect to that tradition. So for those of you who don't know me, my name is Agi Wittich. I'm a scholar-practitioner. So I have a PhD in comparative religions. My focus was yoga and gender. And within that, Iyengar Yoga for Women. So this book was my focus. And I also interviewed teachers within Iyengar Yoga about yoga for women. And I'm also a practitioner of Iyengar Yoga and a teacher of Iyengar Yoga. I teach in Jerusalem, in Israel. So in today's session, we will go through the summary of what we read, just kind of to encapsulate whatever you read. I'll mention the supplementary sources that I've sent out, and then we'll go into our close reading of a few pieces, and then we'll have our discussion and conclusion. But before I go into the summary, I would like to ask you, and you can answer briefly in the chat or open the mic, but briefly, and let us know, share what brought you to your yoga practice. What was your initial motivation? So we read Gita Ji, and I know my own motivation when I was 15 years old. that was very different from Geeta's motivation at the age of 10. So I don't know, maybe age has something to do with that as well. Maybe you can write your age and your motivation when you started, and I can read it out in the chat, or you can open your mind. Why did you start yoga? Was it a back pain like most people today?
Yeah, I started in the 90s, but it was actually for mental health reasons. And then the physical and then the spiritual side of it kind of came along. But the motivation wasn't physical, but obviously the physical benefits. And then as it's layered, the spiritual too. But yes. So it's
Thank you. So
yeah.
Pragya said unhealthy lifestyle, weight gain and back pain from sitting for too long in the office. That's very, very common that people come to yoga to treat their back pain. And Maria shared, I started at around 15 years of age out of curiosity. Me too. And Ruthie shared, I was 22 and went with a friend. I had neck and shoulder pain when I started when I was a student. So pain, many times people reach yoga because of their pain. And that says a lot at the starting point. Yeah. And then when the pain is gone, why do we stay? That's a different reason. Like Sophie hinted to it, that we come for one reason, but then we stay. I mean, even curiosity is over in a few sessions, isn't it? You get it. You know what it is. And then why do you stay? Are you still curious about what yoga is? Or did you find something that makes you stay? Lydie said, I was coming from Aikido. I loved the practice, but in India, I found Iyengar yoga and immediately fell in love with it. Also, love. Love is also amazing. Yes. Okay. I also met Iyengar yoga in India, but in a forest, not in the institute. So interesting. Okay. Anyone else before we continue to the summary? Okay. So, as we began reading Yoga Gems for Women, we began not by her words. We began by the words of her father. And that says something about this book. So in his preface, he explains her journey of yoga. Now we have to really think about this position and how it would be understood today as a man explaining a woman's journey, but it's her teacher. So maybe her teacher should write the first part of her book. But then again, it's her father. So then another layer is added to it, and it's all mixed up, of course. And I really feel that without the foreword of B.K.S. Iyengar, this book would have had less of impact. I cannot measure it in any way. But as I look at other Iyengar yoga publications, they have a different gravitas. They have a different power to them if they have a foreword by Guruji or Gitaji, or if they don't. So in a way, Iyengar approves of this book in his foreword. So then we go into her part as she describes her journey and why she wrote this book. And if you read closely, you see that there are statements that don't go together, that they contradict each other. And there we can see why do people frame the way they do things. And then we go into an exploration of philosophical foundations of yoga through her chapter of the 4 paths to liberation and the paths of yoga, where she explains the 6 limbs, and then what we better know, the 8 limbs of yoga, of Patanjali, of the Ashtanga yoga. Now, we won't have time to go into the 6 limbs and the 8 limbs. I think we talked about this excessively in previous books, and this book it has a different direction, but it's still mentioned it is mentioned right in the beginning as to be a description of the path of yoga. And we will go back to these limbs again and again. So today we won't dive into them. But it's interesting to note that in earlier texts, before the Patanjali Yoga Shastra, there were different systems of yoga who had 6 limbs to them and not 8. And the yama and the niyamas in different texts are different. It's not always 10. I know a text that I studied for my MA thesis that had 20 parts in it, for 10 yamas and 10 niyamas. So these, we just need to keep in mind that the fact that she mentions the 6 paths, or the 6 limbs and the 8 limbs, and then she says there are 4 paths, and then she will say later 3 milestones. So these are lists, and we have to take them with a grain of salt, because in this book, for example, she speaks about the 3 milestones of women, but then a decade later, she would talk about 6 cycles of a woman's life. So these lists change. But what we really understand from reading this beginning of the book is how she began practicing yoga. So she began as a child. She began to practice because of her illness, because of her nephritis at the age of 10. Now, if we know the biography of B.K.S. Iyengar, we know that he was a sickly child. So he didn't start practicing yoga because of his illness. Somebody knows why he started practicing yoga? That's also interesting to think about it. Why did the father start? Do you know? A TV, did he? Sorry, Sophie?
Yeah, TV.
No, he didn't start to cure his illnesses. He started because he was at his uncle's house because his mother died and he couldn't live with his father. So he moved to live with his uncle, and his uncle needed a replacement for someone who left. So he just kind of took B.K.S. Iyengar in and taught him how to practice. And after that incident, he kept on practicing. So it wasn't even his will to practice. And it wasn't even his right to practice there. It was a practice, let's say, hall or practice environment for the royal family in Mysore. He wasn't part of that. So he was sneaked into it. Anyway, wasn't to cure himself. But I think he did understand at the time the pain Geeta went through, because he was also a sickly child, and there she was, his firstborn, also very sick. So we start the book by understanding her starting point. And then, of course, we need to think, okay, she got cured, right, from nephritis. Why did she continue practicing? And then she explained that her motivations, not just to practice, but to share the teachings of yoga, and then to share them in the form of text. And that's a very interesting point. When does a yoga teacher decide to write it down? I mean, writing down something is completely different than teaching a class when you are not recorded. Now it's different, 2025, but back then you were not recorded. Notes were not taken during class. You could not be quoted. So it's a different world to write down a book. And it wasn't her idea, and she was reluctant to do so. And she did so, and it took her many, many years. So she started the book in her, let's say, late 20s, and it came out just before she was 40 years old. So this book has a great span also of the time it took for her to write it down and for it to get published. And then how she sees yoga as a gift for women. And there are parts that we will read later when she says how yoga is best suited for women, and maybe even better for women, not just that it gives benefits, but that women are in a better position than men to start practicing yoga. And we'll have, I hope, a discussion about that as well. So we will touch on a part of the paths of yoga, the 4 paths, but we won't go into the 8 limbs, as I already said. We will get to it at the end of the reading in Unit 8, which is about Shavasana and Pranayama and Samadhi and these final stages. And we will touch upon Asana and Pranayama. So it's basically Yama and Niyama that I'm a bit leaving out. So that was the summary. I just wanted to mention that during these 2 weeks of reading, I've sent you 3 quotes from the reading in order to encourage you to go back to the reading. It's a way to remind you, like to nudge you a bit, go back to the reading. It's really interesting stuff there. I don't know if it worked or not, but I will keep on sending you inspirational quotes. I sent them through WhatsApp and Facebook, so it depends on how you prefer getting them. And then I sent out an explanation about the 3 doshas. So Geeta Iyengar studied Ayurveda, and we will get a special session, I can already say that, with an Ayurvedic practitioner who is also an Iyengar yoga teacher from Turkey. And I will give you more details in the following days about that special session. And of course, it will be recorded and placed on YouTube as well. So I felt like we need to understand a bit more about the doshas because Gita goes into it in this chapter. And if we don't have enough information about what she's talking about, we might miss out. And then I sent you about Sulabha, the mythological story of Sulabha and King Janaka, which is one of my favorites because she has this, we could say, postmodern, but also very, very ancient agenda of gender is a non-issue when it comes to spirituality. Gender is something to do with the body. And then enlightenment has something to do with the infinite, which is far beyond gender. This is something that Prashant talks a lot about, that when we sleep, we are not a man or a woman, we're not a foreigner or an Indian. And it's so beautiful in the story of Sulabha. And I just thought that it's a pity to miss it out if we don't know the story. So I sent you that out. And also sent you an invitation for a recorded talk that I prepared about the Guru Shishya tradition. It's actually 3 talks. One is about wisdom. What is wisdom? How it can be transferred. And it's more about the Upanishadic stories. And then there is one more talk about the teacher. Who is the guru? Who can be a guru? How does a guru act? How is he teaching? And that part is more about the Puranic, and there's a bit of Mahabharata stories in there as well. And the third talk is about the student. Who is the student? How should a student act? And those are 3 stories about Dronacharya from the Mahabharata as well. And I sent you, I think, also an invitation for a yogini talk. So a talk I recorded about women who are considered to be either ascetic women or mystics. And that's also like an enlargement of the story of Sulabha and King Janaka. So if you have any questions, you can ask them now, or we can just go into our reading. Okay. Oh, I missed something in the chat. His brother-in-law, not his uncle, Lidi asked. Okay, so Krishnamacharya was his uncle, but he married Iyengar's sister when she was 11. So he was both his brother-in-law and both his uncle and both his guru. Okay, yeah. So let's go into the reading. And the parts that I would like us to read out are marked in yellow. And whoever wants to read can open their mic and read it out. And I wait for like 10 seconds. And if nobody opens their mic, I will read it out.
I can read.
Thank you.
I was in 2 minds when both the publisher and the author insisted that only I should write forward to this book. The author, Miss Geeta Iyengar, is first my daughter and secondly my pupil. The filial piety naturally persuaded her to seek the blessings of her parents and even more of her preceptor. Then the director of the publishing company is my friend as well as my pupil. I could not but accept and write the forward so as not to sunder the bond between us. Though I am filled with joy that my daughter has made a maiden attempt to write about the disciplines of practice of yoga for the benefit of her sisters, I have to assess her work in its true perspective, lest what I say may be misconstrued as an expatiation of my daughter's work rather than a dispassionate review and appraisal of its merits. No doubt yoga is my very breath, my life, and my very being are soaked in its art, science, and philosophy. Although Geeta observed my practices and my teaching of yoga, she showed no inclination or desire to make a beginning. Her interest arose when she was struck with nephritis. Her ailment became almost fatal when medical treatment produced no signs of progress. As a hapless parent, I could see no way to pay for the inexhaustible list of medicines with my meager finances. Then I placed a choice before her, either to embrace yoga, the only panacea for her, or to live until her disease took its toll. Though young in age, barely 10 years, she understood my ultimatum and made up her mind to take yoga. She gained confidence in herself and dedicated her life to yoga. She gave confidence and dedicated her life to the practice of yoga. Since then, she has undergone rigorous training and has mastered this difficult art. A devoted student, she diligently practiced day and night with attention and has been teaching others since 1961. This book is the outcome of her training and experience.
Just before I'll ask you to read a bit more, pay attention to this. She was a devoted student and she diligently practiced day and night with attention. Okay, she's going to say something quite different.
You want me to read this bit too?
Yes.
The general notion is that yoga is not intended for women. It is fallacious and it underrates the moral, intellectual, and spiritual legacies to which women are entitled as much as men. The author has shown that yoga can be taken up by women in the manner in which other subjects such as law, history, philosophy, science, engineering, medicine, etc. are offered by universities. Multitudes of women are seen nowadays who equal and excel men in every faculty. More women can now come forward and strive to attain new heights to enrich yoga, which is one of our ancient virtues.
Thank you. But this is already a quite interesting beginning because we get a bit of knowledge about who the publisher is and what influence Iyengar has. And also he positions where he thinks Geeta is as a practitioner and teacher and not only his daughter. So he says, don't think that I'm praising my daughter. She gained it. She has a right to get this, the praise she's getting or this book she's publishing. So now, who is willing to continue reading a few more bits or we stop again?
I can read. I can volunteer to read.
Please.
For a long time, I hesitated, but he continued to press me. I felt I had neither the intellectual ability nor the moral courage to write a book, particularly on yoga with special reference to the needs of women. But here a pat of encouragement came from my mother, Amma, as I used to call her. You must write the book, she said, but not to parade your intellectual attainments. God has given yoga as a priceless gift for women, and this you must reveal to the world. Her remarks, born out of her experiences in life, were of more value to me than my knowledge obtained from books. My mother was a saintly woman and led a life of high moral ideals. She did not lecture us on what we should do, but jnana, knowledge, bhakti, devotion, karma, sense of duty, and yoga were expressed in her everyday life and actions. She was an example to us all, the embodiment of pure womanhood. This book is the outcome of my mother's encouragement.
And if you can continue before venturing.
Before venturing to write this book, I pondered over the present-day economic and social conditions of women contrasted with those of centuries ago. The social and political environment, status, and economic conditions of women years ago led them to a simple life. They were not subjected to the same pressures that burden the women in all walks of life today. Now, every item of need has become an indispensable factor of life, which is often beyond one's capacity of acquisition. The economic situation has compelled women to contribute an equal share in order to stabilize living conditions and to avoid present as well as future anxieties. She now has to do double work to do the double work of having to meet financial pressures and maintaining harmony in the family. It is necessary for her to keep perfect health and harmony to withstand the stresses and strains of life. Yoga is capable of giving this needed relief if she devotes a little of her time daily to its practice. Rarely does a pupil find the guru and the father in one person. I consider myself doubly fortunate in this respect. Anna, my father, is my guru. Never did he inflict his opinions or thoughts on me, nor did he try to impose the yoga sadhana on me. There was no compulsion or duress. Yoga was my free choice. Verily, I learnt yoga from him. While teaching me yoga, he treated me not as his daughter, but as a pupil. I know that he is very exacting as a teacher. He is a stickler for discipline and a taskmaster. But his ways are gentle persuasion and not stern reprimand. He expects discipline and keen attention from his pupils. Is not yoga sadhana the greatest of disciplines?
Thank you. So before you go any further, I'd like you to just see how many rows she dedicated to make it clear that her father is her guru and that he is not very strict, or that he is gentle, and that he keeps discipline and attention, that he expects it, but that he's very gentle, because already he had this stereotype about him. That's also interesting to note. And let's read this as well, the first steps in yoga, because I see it linked to everything we read so far.
During a severe attack of nephritis, I was unconscious for 4 days in a nursing home. The doctors did not hold out much hope for my survival, and they informed my parents accordingly. By the grace of God, I survived and was discharged after 3 weeks. I heaved a sigh of relief at the thought of being spared so many injections a day. However, I was given a long list of medicines. The return home was like a release from prison. Little did I know then that after this release, I was to witness a great upheaval in my life. On my returning home, my father kept the list of medicines aside and said sternly, "From tomorrow onwards, no more medicines. Either you practice yoga or get prepared to die." From the next day, I started to practice yogasanas, though not very regularly. Gradually, my health showed signs of improvement. Once a week, I used to go to the doctors for a checkup. "Condition improving, continue the medicines," the doctor would say, and I continued my yoga practice at home. I must, however, admit that I was not very regular.
Remember how he said that she practices morning and night and that she's very dedicated to the practice. So this is the last bit.
Later, when foreign students came to study yoga from my father, I felt ashamed. I thought if foreigners spend a lot of money to derive benefits from yoga at the hands of my father, surely the least I could do was to be sincere and regular. I resolved that I would learn all about yoga and one day become a teacher of yoga as my father. Since 1961, that dream has been fulfilled. This book is the result of my experience as a yoga teacher. During these years, I have given many yoga demonstrations as well.
Thank you. So interesting. So I'm sorry if as a researcher, I see all the mismatches here in the story. She says how gentle he was, but also that he threatened her with death if she does not practice. She says about herself that she's not regular, and he says that she's very sincere in her practice and she practices every day twice. And there are more interesting things about this bit. I was very curious when I started researching this book and Geeta ji herself. Who was her teacher? What knowledge did she gain between, let's say, 1954, when she was 10 years old and started practicing? That's an important year, isn't it, in Iyengar yoga history? And then 1971, when she sat down to write this book, not of free volition, I have to add. So who was her teacher? Now, if you look at, like, this the second edition of the Yoga Jam for Women, that you open the book and then you go one more page and it's very clear. You see her father, you see Guruji, you see B.K.S. Iyengar. Like, that's a very strong stamp for this book. But then this book is dedicated to whom? You see it. So it goes on we have all the notes we need from a book, and then there is the adoration to the guru. And then it goes to dedicated to my mother. And in the 50s, B.K.S. Iyengar was not home a lot. So he was teaching in Mumbai for the weekends. He used to leave home on Thursdays and then come back Sundays or Mondays. And he taught a lot abroad. So in the 50s, he began his trips to Europe and later to the States. So in these years, in the late 50s until the early 70s, he was traveling quite a lot. Who was at home? Her mother. And we know already that Ramamani did practice yoga alongside Guruji. So when they married, she didn't know anything about yoga, and he taught her because he needed an assistant. So it began with lay something on my back, give me that brick. And then it continued to come to my classes. Some women don't want me to touch them, so you will be my hands. And then she became his ears as well, because they told her we have problems with getting pregnant and our menstruation is like this and like that. And then she went back and discussed these women issues that he had no access to. So she became his ears and hands. And he instructed her, of course, what to do. She had no knowledge of yoga herself, but she did practice. And Geeta told me in interviews that she used to practice on the floor with all her children around her. And whenever her father went to these weekends to Mumbai, she would conduct a yoga class to the children. And she would help them in handstands, and they would practice forward bends and back bends and what you can do with children at home. But this was quite regular. This was a regular yoga class that Ramamani taught her children. This is a bit of history that is left out many times. Now, what about women's issues? It was Ramamani that instructed Geeta how to practice during her menstruation. It's true that Iyengar also taught her, but it was through Ramamani. So she told me, I told my mother that I had cramps or that I have some irregularity, and she would discuss this with my father, and then he would instruct her, how should I practice? So she was a very important link. And I think it's kind of a miss out, this part in this story. But here she really says that I learned a lot from my mother. And I think it's heartwarming, just to pay attention to that, the women in the story. When she visited her Krishnamacharya in Mysore, she also met with his wife, which is Iyengar's sister, so Geeta's aunt, Krishnamacharya's wife, who also practiced yoga at home. And Geeta said that she taught her about pranayama and different techniques as a young girl. So that's also an interesting piece, how women, the wives of, how they teach other women within the family these techniques related to women's issues. So just to show you this part that this may be left out. So now we continue, unless you have questions, to the paths of yoga. Okay, great. So let's continue. We start with the definition of yoga.
Should I continue reading?
Yes, please.
Definition of yoga. The word yoga has its root in the Sanskrit word yuj, which means to merge, join, or unite. Yoga is the union of the soul with the eternal truth, a state of unalloyed bliss arising from conquest of dualities. The study of yoga discipline sharpens the power of discernment and leads towards understanding the true nature of the soul, which cannot be fully comprehended by the senses or the intellect alone. The study of yoga enables one to attain the pure state of consciousness and to realize the inner self. Yoga frees one from life's sorrows and from the diseases and fluctuations of the mind. It gives serenity and composure and inward unity amidst the diverse struggles of life. It is the art of knowing oneself and knowing the eternal truth. Yoga is the study of the functioning of the body, the mind, and the intellect in the process of attaining freedom. It is the experience of one's self-acquired knowledge and not the result of book learning. A philosophy, a way. I can't see the top of this. A way of life wherein art and science. Okay, yeah, a battling with logic or a theoretical argument. Yoga is a philosophy, a way of life wherein art and science meet. As Lord Krishna explains to Arjuna, Buddhi Yukto. Okay. Yeah.
Would you like to skip the Sanskrit?
Yeah. Yes. Yeah. It is the knowledge of yoga alone that enables an intellectual whose mind is at peace to discriminate between good and evil and to steer the course of his life skillfully. Yoga teaches one to do one's duty without thought of reward, to be involved in life's turmoils and yet to remain aloof, to act rightly and to liberate oneself from this life.
Thank you. Okay. I think whenever we talk about yoga, it really helps to understand what's the standpoint of the one we are talking with or reading. So what is yoga about? And I didn't choose this part because I don't think you know what yoga is. You apparently do, and you're interested in it. But to understand the definition of yoga by Geeta Iyengar, was there anything here that surprised you when you read it? Something missing, or
can I just say something? I think it's kind of a conflict. I mean, you often hear that from yoga teachers that you can't learn anything from books. And here we are reading a book about her understanding. And it's like, it just puzzles me, this kind of, I just had a recent conversation where something was written, but that's just, you can't learn from books. So what is your reflection?
I think that's why I quoted Rita Keller that said that a good book is better than a bad teacher. And we know that there are practitioners around the world who are practicing, let's say, from books, but now it's coming from video and online and not with a real teacher one-on-one. And I think that even if, well, when I went to India and I met a guru and I told him that when I teach, I see my students for 90 minutes once a week, kind of laughed. Like, what can you teach in 90 minutes a week? And his students see him daily. It's kind of a modern Gurukula where the students, they don't live with the teacher because he has his own privacy, but they're there from morning to the evening. They come in the morning, they do what they do, they go to work, they come back. Maybe they go to their families, so they come only in the morning or only in the late evening. But the idea, this Western idea that's now it's global, it's everywhere, that a yoga class is just 90 minutes a week, that's not traditional at all. So then, but what we accept it as kind of enough, let's say for the beginning, until one has their own personal at-home practice. But it's always shifting, isn't it? The demands and the way we live. So I think you can learn from books, and it's best for me as a scholar practitioner to have both of them. So even when I went to university, they would say, why do you practice? I mean, it's enough to read. And I said, no, that's half of the research. The other half is in my body. Yes, but that's subjective. And I said, that matters most. It's not just about science and big numbers. It's about how does it work? You can't just research a cookbook and look through the recipes. You have to make it. You have to taste it. You have to know if it's good or not. So for me, it's always both. But yes, there is this big resistance to you cannot learn from books. It's an experience. You have to have a teacher. Teacher has to touch you. They have to see you, and so on. Yes, it's always there. Okay. So now I'd like us to look at the threefold quest, as Geeta Ji called it, the ways of the practice. So it's a bit longer than the other bits, so bear with me. Who would like to read? Please go ahead.
According to Patanjali, for self-realization, the soul, the intellect, the mind, and the organs of sense must act in unison. The seeker has to undertake the threefold quest of Bahiranga, sadhana, external quest, Antaranga, sadhana, inner quest, and Antaratma, sadhana, spiritual quest. The following chart will enable the reader to understand the threefold quest better.
Yeah, I'm not sure about this statement, but let's look at the chart. So the external quest, the Bahiranga sadhana, the inner quest, Antaranga sadhana, and the spiritual quest is the Antaratma sadhana, right? So here we see the threefold quest. Maybe it's helpful for those who can absorb the information more visually, but we'll go for reading about it. So this is the Bahiranga sadhana, the pursuit of external purity, and I recommend to skip the Sanskrit. Here it's not even marked. So please.
Okay. Bahiranga sadhana, the pursuit of external purity. The body is the temple of the soul. Just as a clean temple evokes pure thoughts, a clean body leads to a pure mind and is thus a fit abode for the self. In Yoga Sikhopanishad, the importance of a clean body has been explained thus. The body is a temple, and the soul therein is like Shiva. Therefore, shed ignorance and worship the body, considering it as the abode of God. God has given us the body as capital to be used for self-realization. As a shrewd businessman utilizes his capital to obtain gains, so also the body has to be diligently trained by yama, niyama, asana, and pranayama. It has to be kept perfectly healthy and stable. The first step towards self-realization is to keep the body pure and free from dis-ease. This is Bahiranga sadhana, the pursuit of external purity.
Great. Let's go.
2. Antaranga sadhana, the pursuit of inner purity. Having attained purity of the body, the next step is to achieve purity of the mind. In order to do this, one has to understand how the mind functions. To gain knowledge of the external world, the mind makes use of the fine organs of perception: nose, tongue, eyes, ears, and skin. The mind desires, and the senses follow the mind for their gratification. Thus, the mind is caught up in the gratification of desires. In controlling the mind and the senses, the purification process is of great help. The mind has 6 proclaimed enemies: lust, anger, greed, temptation, pride, and jealousy. In order to conquer these enemies, which come in the way of self-realization, pranayama, breath control, and pratyahara, discipline of the senses, are very essential. In the Hatha Yoga Pradipika, the importance of breath is stressed as follows. As a disturbed breath leads to a disturbed mind, a steady breath leads to a steady mind. The two go together. Hence, cultivate a steady and quiet breath. Thereby the mind is controlled and the life of a yogi is prolonged. It is further stated, the Lord of the senses is the mind. The Lord of the mind is the breath. The master of breath is the nervous system. Quietness of the nerves and concentration depend solely on the steady, smooth, and rhythmic sound of inhalation and exhalation. Inner purity is therefore achieved by controlling the senses and the mind, which results in self-control. After this, the disciple is ready for the next step. Number 3. Antaratma sadhana, the pursuit of the soul. In this stage, the mind achieves poise and concentration, and thus points towards the soul. Hence, the last 3 steps of Ashtanga Yoga Dharana, concentration, dhyana, meditation, and samadhi, self-realization, are cultivated. The seeker lives in the soul, is active but devoid of ego and lower self. Indeed, at this time, there is no awareness of one's existence because one has reached beyond sensual pleasures and knowledge. Eternal bliss has been found.
The Kathopanishad.
In the chariot called the body, the soul and the occupant, the intellect, the rider and the mind, the reins. To traverse this existence by conquering the senses, the goal of self-realization has to be reached. Hence, the chariot, body, should be healthy. Then alone can the rider, intellect, by using the reins, mind, control the horses, senses.
Thank you. Now, I think that the idea of dividing the path of yoga into 3 parts, and she says these are steps. So you start with the gross part, you start with the body, and then you go deeper, and then you go deeper. And I think Sophie said this, didn't you? I started with the mental, then it was physical, and then it was spiritual. So you already mentioned these 3 parts of what Geeta Ji says is 1, 2, 3. And for me as a researcher, I don't know how you feel when you read citations from text, but for me, I know these texts, and I always think about what the text is talking about and why did she take this example. And that's why I didn't omit completely the citations, because I think she wanted to say something through the citations. She could have omitted them completely and just say, this is what I think. But what Geeta Ji tried to do is to connect us to a greater tradition, to a greater textual tradition, which I think she researched before writing this book to women. Now, if we look at these texts, and this is what I do a lot, we see a citation from the Hatha Yoga Pradipika, which is quite known among the yogic texts that people talk about. I think first is the Yoga Sutras of Patanjali. That's the most known one. Then comes the Bhagavad Gita. And some know that it's part of the Mahabharata and some don't, but doesn't matter. So these 18 chapters that are called the Bhagavad Gita are the second most known texts about yoga. And I think then comes the Hatha Yoga Pradipika. Could be the Upanishads. I'm not sure, but many know about the Hatha Yoga Pradipika, which is a very important text from the 15th century, written about Svatvarana. And that text, unlike others, contains detailed instructions about asanas, about postures, about pranayama, and about mudras, and about also, it talks about samadhi, the goal of yoga. And it represents a tantric approach to yoga that emphasizes the physical body as a vehicle for spiritual transformation. And it's actually a compilation. Okay, so it's using the Hatha Yoga Pradipika. It's using other texts that were written between the 11th and 15th century. So it takes from previous texts, but then texts coming after the Hatha Yoga Pradipika, like the Garanda Samhita, the Shiva Samhita, they build upon it. So it became very informative, this text. And then she also cites from the Yoga Shikha Upanishad, which is what researchers call a minor Upanishad, but it's also called the Yoga Upanishad. So there are the major Upanishads, which are ancient, and there are the newer Upanishads that the latest is from the 19th century. So it's quite new. It's not as ancient as 1200 BCE. So what's the Yoga Upanishad? It's a group of texts that generally emerged during this period, so the couple of last hundreds of years, that also focused on yogic practices, especially those related to Hatha Yoga and Tantra. And the exact date of composition is not known. And most scholars place them in the medieval period of Hindu literature, likely between the 14th and the 17th century, so after the Hatha Yoga Pradipika. And these texts talk about Kundalini energy, which is, I think, almost 100% left out of Iyengar yoga literature. And there are discussions about mantras and chakras and nadis and different yogic techniques. So for me, it's quite interesting that she mentions these texts, even though a lot of what is in these yoga Upanishads is not part of Iyengar yoga as it was understood then and as it is practiced today. Then she goes to the Katha Upanishad, which is the oldest Upanishad that we know. It's likely composed between 800 and 400 BCE. And it is part of the principal or the major Upanishads, where there is a dialogue between young Nachiketa and Yama, the lord of death, the god of death. And it has this story about this boy who comes to the world of death to learn from the, let's say, god of death about yoga. And there is a beautiful dialogue there. I think I put it in one of the talks about with the Guru Shishya tradition. And what I thought might be useful here is like a guide for yogic texts that I thought about sending you to help you like contextualize yogic texts and to understand when they were and what they discuss. So I'm planning on sending this to you. It's free to download, of course, like other materials that I've already sent. So this is the part, if you don't have any questions about the bits that we read or the add-ons that I had, is where we go for our discussion. So I'll share the discussion questions here in the chat, and I'll also read them out. So the first question is, so Geeta Iyengar began practicing yoga due to a serious illness when she was 10 years old. And the question is, how might personal challenges or health issues influence someone's yoga journey? And also, if you want to share, have you experienced something similar? So some of you already shared it. The second question, Geeta describes her father as both parent and guru, noting he treated me not as his daughter, but as a pupil. So how do you navigate the teacher-student relationship in yoga while maintaining appropriate boundaries? There were no boundaries there. She lived with him and she served him, and he was constantly her guru. So that's another thing to think about. And the third question is, the text describes asana as the beginning as well as the foundation of yoga vidya, the knowledge of yoga. How does this perspective compare with how asana is commonly viewed in Western yoga settings? So we'll go for a few minutes of discussion and then we'll meet up here for our conclusion. So thank you all for the wonderful discussions. I heard discussions about teacher-student boundaries, and we discussed our own experience with classes where the teacher is also teaching one of their parents. I also talked about my experience and other teachers that I know teaching their parents. And someone talked about teaching their spouse, and we discussed that a bit. And there was another very interesting talk about the cultural context of what is the Western world or the Western understanding of yoga and the cultural background that there is for Indians in India or outside of it. And there was also a very interesting discussion about, is yoga only physical? Can it be reduced just to the physical level? And there was a very strong claim in one of the groups that even if you start with the physical and you want to stay there, you'll gain the mental and spiritual benefits, like even if you don't want it, if you don't want to call it that way. There was another discussion about whether or not we need books. And there was a very beautiful argument saying that we don't need them, but we can use them to better understand our experiences and to contextualize them, which I really appreciated. So we need to conclude, and we will continue on reading. Our next reading unit is like the second half of the part one of theory. And it starts with, are women eligible for yoga? The nature of health. Is yoga ideal for women? And the 3 milestones in a woman's life. I'll send you this through WhatsApp and Facebook, and I'll send out a newsletter as well. And I just wanted to tell you that I'm available for follow-up questions, any thoughts that you have, or even ideas regarding our reading. Yeah, you can get in contact through Facebook or WhatsApp, or just email me. I'm here for an open discussion. I'm very happy to get your feedback. I would love to hear from you what you found most valuable about our session today. Did you hear something new, surprising, or was something made more clear for you that was not that clear before the session? Something that you take away with you. Could you please share it either in the chat or just open the mic?
I think just like different perspectives from people practicing in different parts of the world, and their journeys, their experiences, through the discussions, so many different things are coming out. So I think that's really, it gives more insight, especially from people of different ages, also how they approach yoga, their ideas. I think that's really beneficial. It gives a nice holistic view of what yoga practice is, can be, has been for others.
Yeah, I really enjoyed the breakout chats as well, because they're stimulating, getting different people's ideas, and makes you think. But yeah, stimulating. Thank you.
Natasha wrote in the chat that she loves the info about the Shastric history of books quoted by Geeta, and that she loved sharing thoughts in the breakout rooms. And okay, so thank you all. And I'll keep on sending you extra materials and questions. And please let me know how it goes. How does the reading go? This next part is going to be very interesting. And I hope you can relate. Most of us are women reading this book, but even men are invited, of course. So thank you all.
Thank you.